Welcome back to Simple Truth. We're pulling out some truths out of the story of David. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 24. We just finished last week. We read it all, right? So we read all the way through verse 22. And we're talking about this encounter between Saul and David. David has him dead to rights, right? And in Saul's own words, Saul says to him, "Hey, what man does this? What man, when he has his enemy, lets him go?" Right? So Saul is, not only is Saul able to see clearly for a second, he's able to see the difference, right, between himself and David. This is what happens. This is what God requires. This is what God wants. This is what Saul rejected. Right? He wasn't willing to be obedient to God, even to death. Right? He feared for his own life. He feared for what was going to happen. And so he made a choice to make sacrifices when he shouldn't have. Right? He made a choice to not kill everything when God said kill everything. And then God tore away the kingdom and gave it to somebody else, and this mental confusion came on him. But in this moment, we've been talking about the fact that God cut through the mental confusion and gave Saul some clarity for a minute. And what did Saul see? He saw godliness. He saw a man treat him the way he was unwilling to treat David, right? With respect, right? With allowing God to be in charge. That's what David was showing. So it's God who cut through to get to Saul. That's what happens when we're godly. There's those moments where we want to rely on our own flesh. We want to rely on our own ideas, our own thoughts, our own ways, but they aren't cutting through. We just keep arguing. And we keep arguing, and we keep arguing. But sometimes we get it right, and godliness comes through. And then what happens? Well, what happens is people respond. See, people respond to Jesus. They don't respond to Andy. Oh, I can say some good things and some nice things, but when I'm talking like Jesus, when I'm acting like Jesus, when I'm being like Jesus, right? Looking like Jesus to other people, people then start responding to that Jesus. We want them to respond to us, but really they're going to respond to the Jesus or the lack of Jesus in us. When I start arguing with people, they argue right back. They're responding to the lack of Jesus. When I refuse to argue with people, they may argue for a second, but sooner or later they stop the arguing. Right? So Saul recognizes this, and he says to David, who would do this? You are a better man than I am. Listen, that can quickly lead to pride when we start hearing people say, you're a better man than I am, you're a better man than I am. But the essence of it is true. Are you a better man, woman, child? Are you better than other people? Not because of you, not because of your own strength, not because of what you want, but because of what God is doing in you. Because people can see Jesus. Right? People want to argue all the time. They can't argue with Jesus. You can't. This is why people want to change the argument. This is why people want to, right, make you seem more human. Because when you're being Christ-like, they can't argue with you. But the second you start being more human-like, well, then they can argue. And so, again, we're not arguing with Jesus. What we do is we argue about your interpretation of Jesus, my interpretation of Jesus. Right? Never would I say Jesus is wrong, but I'm going to say the Jesus in you is wrong because I don't interpret things the way that you interpret it. It causes great frustration and great problems. Right? We don't want to respond to Jesus, so I'm going to make you not Jesus. Then I can keep arguing with you. Right? So Saul, he reacts to the Jesus within David. Right? He says, hey, you're better than me. And then Saul makes a proclamation, a declaration. I know that you are going to be the next king. You understand how important this moment is. I know what's coming next, right? So I want you to chew on that for a minute. It seems like a weird place to end, but I want to pick up next time on I know, right? But I want you to think about this whole thing, right? I want you to think about Are you in a place where you are able to recognize and respond to the Jesus in other people? Are you responding to the Jesus in other people? And do you ever stop and say, why am I arguing with this person about this? Well, it's that mental confusion thing. The mental confusion that comes on us will cause us to argue with Jesus because we'll claim somebody's not being Jesus. It's very, very, very strange. It's very odd. People who we would say were being Jesus like 1 minute ago are suddenly not Jesus-like. Right? Now again, some of that we ought to be able to discern. There are people saying they're like Jesus who just aren't. They're changing who Jesus is. That's the confusion. Right? So we need to be careful about this whole thing. We need to know where we are. Right? So I'm going to send you back to last week and say, hey, are you dealing with the mental confusion in your life? Have you dealt with the spiritual cataracts that are helping you to not see correctly and well, right? And then, are you willing to recognize and respond to Jesus? That's the second part of this. Saul submitted to the authority of Jesus. I recognize it, and I know, right? We're going to leave it right there. Chew on that. We'll see you next time right here on Simple Truth.